Greetings to all of you and welcome. I am Samson Websi in Yaoundé with another edition of Political Focus. On Thursday, the 25th of April 2019, a quarrel and a fight between two young men in Obala in the Central region led to the death of one of the fighters, thereby sparking off a confrontation between other youths of two ethnic communities. It only took the intervention of security forces to prevent a more sinister escalation that would have ensued. Coincidentally, the Obala incident took place exactly on the same day when some experts were rounding off a colloquium in Yaoundé on multiculturalism and on how to promote peaceful coexistence among the different ethnic, tribal and linguistic communities that make Cameroon a delicate patchwork to hold together in one piece. In fact, the task of ensuring peaceful coexistence among different components of the Cameroonian society has never been as daunting as it is today, having been poisoned by a chilly political atmosphere now prevailing. Many Cameroonians of goodwill have sounded the alarm bell for each and every Cameroonian to rise above their sectarian cleavages, to preempt or avoid the kind of ethnic conflagration and intercommunal violence we have seen destroy entire countries. Members of the National Commission for the Promotion of Bilingualism and Multiculturalism are proposing a society model that will make Cameroon's sociocultural, ethnic and linguistic diversity an asset for the country's development rather than allow it to become the gems of its own self-destruction. But for the country's diversity to become an asset and not a liability, Cameroonians across the board must adopt a positive change of attitude towards each other rather than expect the love for one another to be decreed by some higher authority. It is only such positive change of attitude that can prevent future skirmishes like what happened in Obala from becoming Cameroon's own version of genocide or ethnic cleansing. Stay tuned. I will be right back. Welcome back. Political Focus continues with a review of the political week as seen by the newspapers. Charles Tembe has our press review.
The newspapers this week have been awash with headlines on the European Union's Parliament's resolutions on Cameroon. The French-language daily Le Jour presents a summary of the 13-point resolutions, which the paper says have caused panic in Yaoundé. Le Jeudien reports that the European Union Parliament has condemned the use of force against civilians and called for an immediate ceasefire in the crisis-ridden northwest and southwest regions. The National Bilingual Daily Cameroon Tribune reports that the government, through its spokesman and communication minister, René Emmanuel Sadi, has dismissed the European Parliament's resolutions on Cameroon as false accusations. In a press statement, the minister reaffirmed that Cameroon remains a sovereign rule of law and condemned what he called untruths, gratuitous affirmations, ungrounded recriminations and injunctions accompanied by blackmail directed against Cameroonian authorities and the country's security and defense forces. Cameroon Tribune also reports that the Senate and National Assembly have, in separate releases, condemned the statements made by the European Union Parliament. And the Post newspaper headlines Senate and National Assembly strike European Union Parliament over resolution on Anglophone crisis. That's followed by the riders. The SDF parliamentary group dissociates itself from Senate Speaker Nyat CPDM EU attack, says they were not consulted. Meanwhile, Le Jour questions what Cameroon's Senate and National Assembly have done to resolve the Anglophone crisis when they have always avoided having the issue on the legislative agenda. That'll be it for the Political News Review this week.
Charles Tembe with a review of what the newspapers reported during the week. Members of the National Commission for the Promotion of Bilingualism and Multiculturalism have been exploring better ways and means of promoting peaceful coexistence among Cameroonians from different ethnic, linguistic and cultural backgrounds. The Commission seems to be worried about some recent public utterances that have created a suspicious atmosphere between and among certain ethnic communities. And even as the Musonge Commission assembled some experts in Yaoundé to brainstorm on how to reverse an emerging spate of negative ethnicity in the country, some Cameroonians have also been reflecting on how Cameroonians can live and coexist like children of the same parents. Sam Bukuba asked some Cameroonians how they think peaceful coexistence can be enhanced. He prepared the following report.
Political discourse in Cameroon of recent has been resonating with the concept of peaceful coexistence, or what is referred to as harmonious living together. This is in tune with epithets like national unity and national integration or national homogenization. However, the perception and reality of peaceful coexistence differs among Cameroonians.
I don't think there is a particular issue of living together. People are mixed, so they don't have an Anglophone quarter, Francophone quarter, Bamileke quarter. People are mixed all over the place, and even in companies, people are mixed. In the past, marriage were like Douala, Douala, Bamileke, Bamileke. So now it is mixed.
People are living together because we are in the same space, but we don't share the same values because everybody has his own perception of life. I think that even the tribalism is a great handicap in our country. People are just pretending. In our society, we can perceive it even when we are going to some administration.
Peaceful coexistence covers the whole gamut, including living the country's ethnic and linguistic diversity. Justice Benjamin Itue.
Our country, we say, has about 250 ethnic groupings, tribes and so on. Living together has to be living together within the context of all these tribes. It is also living together as Anglophones and Francophones. It is also living together even in our own tribal setups, where you have disagreements and so on and so forth. When we live together, there is more of social cohesion. There is more of national unity. There is more of understanding, and it fosters peace and union amongst all Cameroonians.
Forging social cohesion among Cameroonians has suffered some setbacks, such as the widespread use of hate and divisive language, says the president of the National Commission for the Promotion of Bilingualism and Multiculturalism, Peter Mafani Masonge.
A lot of negative actions that have taken place. For example, there's a lot of hate language that we notice in the social media. People have been stigmatized. Some have been called Sadina, some have been called Tontina, and so we're all Cameroonians. We were created, we were put in this country. We belong here. Everybody belongs.
There is therefore the urgent need to de-emphasize the use of hate speech and emphasize the virtues of peace among peoples and communities. Honorable Mary Mebuka.
All of us should promote peace. We should mainstream peace in every gathering that we find ourselves. I plead with my people to refrain from hate language so that we can be able to build the community.
Promoting peaceful coexistence may also be through cultural get-togethers that draw strength in diversity to foster unity and peace. The Minister of Supreme State Audit, Rose Mba Acha Fomundam.
Coming together, we reinforce our unity. Reinforcing our unity will again enable us to speak with one voice, a voice of peace, a voice of unity.
Cameroon's bicultural character could also be made to count by considering the bilingualism factor in the appointment of office holders in government.
Nobody should hold a really top responsibility without being able to express himself in English and French. It may not come today, it may not come tomorrow, but let it come someday. And of course, for people to express themselves that way, what we have gathered on the ground is that they need a motivation for those who can pass the test of bilingualism.
Peaceful coexistence can also be enhanced through shared values and principles to engender understanding, tolerance, and acceptance among peoples and communities. Professor Stephen Kizito Fobi.
Highlight some of the constitutive elements of living together, which is shared values and principles. Because you cannot live together if you do not have what puts you together. In order to negotiate, you have to dialogue about what are the values you want to govern your living together.
The National Commission for the Promotion of Bilingualism and Multiculturalism should, according to Professor Willibrod Zengwa, work for truth, peace and reconciliation, as well as stamp out hate speech in the media.
Transform the National Commission of Bilingualism and Multiculturalism and enlarge it to become much more of a commission for peace, social justice, truth and reconciliation amongst Cameroonians. There should be a commission set up, made up of expert lawyers, judges, to stamp out hate speeches and hate actions. One of the bedrocks of the current crisis is the increasing hate speeches by our media, both public and private. We have public and private media has been engaged in exaggerated hate speech with impunity.
And Cameroonians could also start talking about socio-cultural linkages as a way forward to building bridges and not walls across ethnic and linguistic cleavages in the Cameroon nation state, asserts an anthropologist, Professor Charlie Gabriel Mbok.
Union is more dynamic, and living together means that you have to bridge gaps between people, acknowledging that beyond yourself, there's somebody else. Unless you do it, you make it wrong. We live in different socio-cultural ecologies, and we have to ensure that we are only what we are when we are recognized by others as what we are. And bringing people together, we have to learn about that culture of bridges. Without linkages, we are set alone, and this is counterproductive. Unless we come together and talk together, we cannot pretend any living together.
Indeed, the pretension over peaceful coexistence requires the sincerity and goodwill of all and sundry.
Sam Bukuba, our guest to better articulate the different perspectives of multiculturalism and peaceful coexistence, is a genuine intellectual who was carefully mentored by the late Professor Bernard Sokikai Fonlan. Emeritus Professor Kashim Ibrahim Tala, Prof, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
When we talk about multiculturalism, you as a literary mind, what does it mean?
Multiculturalism is a very controversial term, and it has different meanings for different people at different times. But simply, multiculturalism means the peaceful coexistence of different cultures, the recognition that no culture is dominant, that all cultures are equal, and all cultures are expected to respect one another.
Cameroon is a multicultural society if we go by the number of linguistic and ethnic groups we have in the country. Will you look at it as an asset or as a liability?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. It can be both asset and liability. But to begin with, the numerous cultures that we have here, thank God, are not in conflict. We have peaceful coexistence, and where you have one or two misunderstandings, it usually concerns the issue of land. Most cultures here live peacefully. For instance, people live the northwest, they come to littoral, they live littoral, they go to the north, they live peacefully. As far as that is concerned, multiculturalism is an asset. Now, when you come to our post-colonial history, you know how Cameroon came into existence. It was a creation, artificial creation by the Europeans for their own convenience. They brought people together irrespective of linguistic or cultural boundaries. After they have left, we are bound to live within that diversified country and to live together. That is where multiculturalism is, for the time being, a threat, and we are working towards bringing it to be an asset. You see, our history of 1961, which is well known, so I don't need to go into details there, but as a result of that history of 1961, we have two dominant cultures. The French, which is a
foreign cultures.
Foreign cultures now, yes, the inherited cultures. And then we have English, which is the minority culture. Because of the politics of government at that time, which was a policy of assimilation. The minority Anglophone culture was going to be assimilated gradually but surely into the Francophone culture. And that led to the non-respect of the 1961 Constitution, which had provisions to protect the equality of the two cultures. So this has continued, and it has led to the present situation in which we find ourselves. But as you know, the President of the Republic, realizing this situation, decided to create the National Commission for the Promotion of Bilingualism and Multiculturalism. This in itself is a very major decision. It is a recognition that the previous policy of assimilation has failed. So we need now a policy of convergence, a policy of collaboration, a policy of peaceful coexistence and good governance. So that is the logic behind the creation of this commission.
If you are just tuning in, this is Political Focus, coming to you from the national station of the CRTV in Yaoundé. We will be back. Welcome back. Our guest on Political Focus today is Emeritus Professor Kashim Ibrahim Talla. During this meeting organized by the National Commission for the Promotion of Bilingualism and Multiculturalism, you made a presentation on the promotion of multiculturalism through literature. How can that be done?
You see, one of the purposes we are here at this conference or colloquium is to find ways and means of promoting, sustaining multiculturalism. You see, multiculturalism is a foreign concept which we have appropriated. Since it deals with universal values of peaceful coexistence, of recognition of cultural diversity and difference, of the respect of each of the various cultures, we need to find ways, because it has come to stay. The concept will not leave tomorrow. It is a permanent concept. So how do we propagate it? How do we promote it? You realize that the greater part of Cameroon population is made up of youths. So I thought that the best way is to teach our youth, because tomorrow you and I will go. The youth will remain. Multiculturalism will remain. So we need to find a way to keep multiculturalism alive. Now, literature and multiculturalism are so intricately connected, since they all deal with culture, so that to discuss one without the other is a bit difficult. So I thought, as a professor of literature, that the short-term way is, since literature is already in our program, we should use it, because the very universal concepts which multiculturalism teaches is also the very concept which our literature teaches. You should realize that in Cameroon we have two different kinds of literature. We have the oral literature, which was our own natural literature, and we have the written literature, which we borrowed from outside. Our oral literature contains virtually all the values of good governance, of ethics, of peaceful living together, and so on. So I felt that if we use it as a short-term measure, we can start teaching it while we have the opportunity to assemble some curriculum developers to now develop a module. The point I raised here is that we have three ministries of education. At the basic, there's primary, secondary, and tertiary. Ironically, these three are independent, autonomous ministries. They don't collaborate. They don't work together. I've never heard of a meeting of the three ministries. So now it is necessary.
Are you kind of advocating a return to the big Ministry of National Education, which incorporated everything?
No, not necessarily. But when these three ministries meet, the curriculum will be devised in such a way that it will be progressive from the basic level to the secondary level to the higher education level. And a child will follow. As at now, most students in Cameroon meet oral literature at the level of the university. No background Nothing. You and I, who grew up in our villages, we were lucky to have known this oral literature, which is part of our culture, and so we have grown with it. But most of our children today are born in urban areas. They don't know our culture. So you can see the kind of life our children are living today. The children are knifing each other in school. They are beating up their lecturers. They are smoking or taking drugs. All those did not happen in our days because of the effect of our culture, which is expressed through our oral literature. What is important is to start to teach multiculturalism to our children. You see, a child is born into a culture. The child is not born with the culture. So the child has to learn that culture. Modernization has affected the context of oral literature performance, like the storytelling. Now, there's no fireside. Part of my proposal demands that we should go back to resuscitate the teaching of oral literature. And this should not be left only to the school system alone. Parents should assume their responsibility, teach their children some of these values. The value of good governance had existed, in those early days. If you're a civil servant, as a third-class clerk, you rode a bicycle. As an assistant executive officer, you rode a motorcycle. As an executive officer, in those days, you rode Opel Cadet car. But today, a messenger comes to the office in a Mercedes. Nobody questions him how he came about the Mercedes.
In the course of your research, did you come across examples of societies which have developed their multicultural heritage to the point that there's more harmonious living together and it's a conducive society to live in?
Well, a very good example is South Africa. In spite of the long years of apartheid, you've seen that South Africa has been able to come closer to this issue of peaceful and meaningful coexistence than us. You have the
concept of Ubuntu.
Yes, you are because we are. That is it. So you find Ghana, you find Ivory Coast, you have Tanzania. There are several countries like that have learned. But it's never too late to learn. We can also follow that path. So long as I keep saying, where there's a will, there's always a way.
We've talked much about oral literature. What about the written literature aspect of it?
You see, literature, whether oral or written, does the same thing. But what is happening today with the written literature is that our writers, after independence, were mostly concerned with the socio-political situation rather than with the cultural situation. And now that the socio-political situation is getting worse, most of the writers have become disillusioned. They are now talking about their personal vendettas in life. But oral literature continues to be anchored on culture. That's why I talk much about it. The written literature still does that, because when you write about bad governance, what you are advocating is good governance. So it does the same thing. For instance, you are a journalist. You have served CRTV for 30 years. You have not moved. You will soon go on retirement. You don't see a future for yourself. That is what written literature is concerned now, that kind of a bleak future. I use you as an example. It is for all of us, a whole generation. You have somebody, you don't know what he has done in the world. He is a minister, because the government has its own criteria. The criteria which you and I recognize, which is the criteria of meritocracy, is hardly ever respected for reasons that are more political. Political expediency is given preference over meritocracy.
You talked about politics. In a multicultural society like Cameroon, in which we find ourselves, the tendency is for one ethnic or cultural group to try to dominate the other at the level of governance structures. How do we tackle it?
That is what multiculturalism is fighting against. That is, each ethnic group should consider itself as an equal to the other ethnic groups. Multiculturalism does not recognize a dominant culture. It sees all cultures as equal. and demands that all cultures should respect one another. That is multiculturalism. If it is well applied, it is definitely going to solve our present problem, even politically. Because you see, as human beings, we are genetically self-seeking. We think only of ourselves first. And Charles Dickens, in his book, Hard Times, has a character called Bitzer who made a very, very classical statement that the entire social system is based on self-interest. Now, our traditional culture says that the individual's self-interest is subjected to the will of the community or group. So, it's the community first, self second. But our culture today, which is the Western assumed culture of individualism, the individual is first. Now, when the individual is first, it follows logically that the interest of the majority is ignored. So, what multiculturalism is trying to teach is that all cultures are equal. People should learn to respect the other culture. And above all, people should learn to accept when they make a mistake. You see, in this country, several mistakes have been done. You know that, I know that. But nobody has had the courage or the temerity to acknowledge the fact that, no, what I've done is wrong, so let us change it. That is it. And the natural tendency is for those who belong to the so-called majority culture, let me not call them dominant because they are not. They are just majority in number. They think that they have the right to impose on those who are in the minority. That is wrong. Today, the minority group should be considered on equal footing with the majority group. I know that is very difficult because it requires a very radical change of mind. Because if I belong to the majority group and I'm enjoying the privileges of that group, to you to ask me now to put those privileges aside is not going to be easy. I know that, but we should start somewhere.
We equally find ourselves under a lot of influence from foreign culture. You now have Chinese, you have the invasion of foreign cultures into our own cultural space. How can we fight that?
No. You see, culture is not static. Culture is dynamic. And culture benefits from contact with other cultures. So what we need to be careful about is not to follow the general tendency, because the general tendency is that we keep the worst of our own culture and of the foreign culture and we discard the best. So, as Achebe once said, if we are angels, we should learn to keep the best in our culture and take the best in other cultures, and then we will have a very unique and ideal culture. You see, Western culture, you have to understand, is individualistic. We need leaders who are open-minded. We need leaders who accept other cultures, who accept other people. There is no country that is an island today.
Prof, beyond literature as a tool of promoting multiculturalism, there is this phenomenon that is common and almost very disturbing in Cameroon today, that of hate speech. It's also a threat to multiculturalism and the virtues that you've been talking about. How do we get out of this prevailing situation?
Yes, that's a very difficult situation indeed. We have become so self-centered that we don't think of any other person except ourselves. And that is the reason for this hate speech. This is the role mostly of the churches, the religions, the mosques, and so on. We have to preach tolerance of one another, and which is one of the tenets of multiculturalism, tolerance. You know, this hate speech did not come up in one day, something that has grown up with time. So it will also take time for us to dissipate it. But it is good to start somewhere. The teaching of multiculturalism will help to reduce it. You know, it just tells you simply that you are a Cameroonian, I'm a Cameroonian. And as Cameroonians, you have the right to your culture, I have the right to my culture. But there are certain universals between our two cultures which we can develop and use it now to create a national culture, which we do not have. We are Cameroonians, minus the national identity card that you and I carry. What is there to show that we are Cameroonians? Nothing. We don't have a national dress. Agreed that in the area of cuisine, we are very united. We eat all kinds of food and we are happy with it. But when it comes to the values, the immaterial values of honesty, of hard work, of concern for one another, of respect for authority, we are divided. Because these are things that you and I cannot measure. But these are the most important things. Our elders, we respected them. You cannot be sitting down when an elder is standing up. You give him your seat. Today, enter the bus, and a child will tell you, you paid the same fare as myself, so both you and I have the same right to the seat. No, that is total mark of indiscipline. And multiculturalism is trying to fight against those acts of indiscipline, those acts of disrespect. It is trying to bring us back to the universal values of the law for one another, the sacredness of our national patrimony. If you look at the national budget, it's a budget which does not concern only you alone. It is a budget for the whole country. So you needed to protect it, not to spend it extravagantly.
Thank you very much, Emeritus Professor Kashim Ibrahim Talla, for being guest on Political Focus.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And I must say that Professor Emeritus Kashim Ibrahim Talla was an expert during a forum organized by the National Commission for the Promotion of Bilingualism and Multiculturalism. He was one of the experts brought to share his experience and perspective on how Cameroon can move forward. And that is where we will end today's edition of the program that benefited from contributions from Charles Tembe and Sam Bukuba. Our production assistant was Ayim Bile, with Godwin Fusi Awantu and Olive Giselle Eyenga as our sound technicians, while Wan Pongam supervised the production. For presentation in Yaoundé, I have been Samson Websi, thanking you for listening. Bye till next week.